The fog came in thick off the moors at October, rolling down the hillsides like something alive, something slow and deliberate, pressing itself against the windows of Ashford Village as if it wanted to look inside. 14-year-old Eli Marsh ate his toast without tasting it. He sat at the kitchen table in the dim morning light, staring at the condensation crawling down the glass of the back door. His mother, Karen, moved behind him in the narrow kitchen, pouring coffee, checking her phone, doing all the small mechanical things that mothers do when they are not quite paying attention. His younger sister, Poppy, was still upstairs. He could hear the muffled thud of her music bleeding through the ceiling. "You got your PE kit?" his mother asked. "Yeah." "And you'll be home by 5? Mrs. Farrell's coming for dinner." "Yeah." He didn't look up from the condensation. There was something about the way the water moved on glass, slow, then fast, merging with other droplets and paths that seemed almost chosen, that he couldn't pull his eyes from. It reminded him of something. He couldn't say what. "Eli, 5 o'clock. I know." He pushed back his chair, shouldered his backpack, and kissed his mother on the cheek. She smelled of coffee and her lavender hand cream. Later, she would remember the kiss. She would replay it 10,000 times in the months that followed, the brief, absent pressure of his lips, the way he didn't quite look at her, the way the door swung shut behind him and the fog swallowed him whole. She would think, "I should have held on." Ashford was a small village in North Yorkshire, the kind that appears on tourist maps with a watercolor illustration of its Norman church and a single pub with a hanging sign depicting a fox. It had 740 residents, one primary school, one chip shop that closed at 9, and a stretch of open moorland to the north that the locals called the Hollow, though no one seemed entirely sure why, or when the name had started. Eli walked to school the long way, as he always did, cutting behind the churchyard along the narrow path that ran beside the dry stone wall. It added 10 minutes to his journey. His mother disapproved. His best friend, Connor Walsh, thought it was weird, but Eli liked the quiet of it. The way the village noise fell away and you were left with just the crunch of gravel underfoot and the occasional cry of something distant on the moor. That morning, the fog was so thick he could barely see 10 meters ahead. The churchyard dissolved into gray shapes. The wall beside him appeared and disappeared. His breath came in small clouds that merged with a larger cold. He was halfway along the path when he stopped. There was a boy standing in the churchyard. Eli could see him through the gap in the wall, a gap that had been there since the summer, when a section of stone had collapsed and the parish council hadn't yet got round to fixing it. The boy was standing maybe 15 meters away, very still, facing away from the path. He was wearing a dark coat, and he was thin, not just lean but thin, in the way that made you uncomfortable to look at. His head was slightly bowed. Eli stopped walking. "Hello," he called. The boy did not move. "You all right?" Nothing. Just the fog and the silence, and the boy standing absolutely still among the graves. Eli stood there for perhaps 20 seconds, a cold that had nothing to do with October settling in his chest. Then he did something that he could not later explain. He turned around and walked back the way he had come. He went the short way to school, arriving 3 minutes late to registration, and he didn't tell anyone what he'd seen. He told himself it was nothing. By lunchtime, he'd almost believed it. School was the ordinary machine of it. Double maths, then English, then the gray cafeteria with its smell of reheated pasta and the ambient noise of 200 teenagers. Connor sat across from him, talking about the football at the weekend. A girl called Priya, who sat next to Eli in English, asked if he'd done the essay on Lord of the Flies. He had done the essay. He'd done it the night before, sitting at his desk while the wind moved through the village, and Poppy practiced a recorder badly somewhere down the hall. He'd written about how the boys on the island lost themselves, about how the thing they became was always inside them, waiting. His teacher, Mr. Alderton, had made a note in the margin. "Eli, interesting but disturbing angle. Let's discuss." "Yeah," he told Priya. "I did it." After school, he walked home alone. Connor had football practice. Eli put his earphones in and took the long way again, back through the churchyard path, because he wanted and needed to see that the gap in the wall was empty, that there was nothing there, that the morning had been a trick of fog and tiredness. The gap in the wall was empty, but there was something on the ground in the churchyard, just inside the gap. He stopped and looked at it. A shoe. A single trainer, white with a dark sole, sitting upright on the grass, as if placed there deliberately. Size 7 or 8, he guessed, roughly his own size. He stood looking at it for a long time. Then he walked home, faster than usual, and when his mother asked him how his day was, he said, "Fine." And when Mrs. Farrow came for dinner, he sat through the meal and said the right things and laughed at the right times, and later in bed. He lay staring at the ceiling and told himself that shoes ended up in churchyards all the time. People left things places. It meant nothing. He fell asleep around midnight. That was Wednesday. On Thursday morning, Eli Marsh did not come down for breakfast. Karen Marsh called the school at 8:47 a.m., assuming Eli had simply left early. She called his mobile. It went to voicemail, his voice young and slightly bored, asking her to leave a message. She called Connor Walsh. Connor hadn't seen him. By 10 o'clock, Karen was standing in the village police office, a small room attached to the back of the council building, staffed by a single community officer named P.C. Lena Holt, explaining in a voice that was very careful and very controlled that her son was missing. Lena Holt was 28 competent and had worked in Ashford for 3 years without dealing with anything more serious than a stolen bicycle and a fight outside the pub on New Year's Eve. She took Karen's statement, called in to the North Yorkshire Police, and by noon there were 2 detective constables from Harrogate driving up the A1. By Thursday evening, the village knew. It spread the way news spreads in small places. Through the school gate, through the WhatsApp groups, through Mrs. Patel at the post office, who had seen everything and told everyone. By Thursday night, people were standing in small clusters outside the pub with a fox on its sign, speaking in low voices and looking up at the moors. "Have they checked the hollow?" Someone asked. "Don't be daft," someone else replied. "Kids go up there all the time." But no one sounded entirely convinced. Detective Inspector Raymond Cross arrived from Harrogate on Friday morning. He was 53, gray-haired, professionally neutral, with a particular emotional flatness of a man who had investigated too many missing children cases and learned to keep himself at a distance. He set up a command post in the village hall and began the systematic work of retracing Eli Marsh's last known movements. CCTV from the chip shop, the only camera in the village, showed Eli walking past at 3:52 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon. He was alone, earphones in, moving in the direction of the churchyard path. That was the last confirmed sighting. Cross interviewed Karen Marsh for 2 hours. She was precise and composed and only cried once, briefly, when Cross asked about Eli's state of mind. He was quiet, she said. He'd been quiet for a week or so, but he was always a quiet boy. Any change in behavior? Unusual moods, withdrawal from friends. He seemed preoccupied. I thought it was school stress. He'd started going a long way to school through the churchyard, which I didn't like, but Eli does things in his own way. She caught herself. Cross noted. Long way, churchyard path, deliberate route. Why? He interviewed Connor Walsh, who said Eli had seemed fine, but admitted he'd been a bit off since the start of term. He interviewed Mr. Alderton, who produced the essay on Lure of the Flies and read out the margin note with a slightly uncomfortable manner of someone who wonders if they miss something. He interviewed the 12-year-old girl who lived opposite the church, who said she'd seen someone standing in the churchyard early Wednesday morning. She'd assumed it was an adult. She said the figure had been really still, like a statue or something. Cross visited the churchyard. The single white trainer was still there, bagged now in clear plastic by the forensics team. It was not Eli's size. Lab analysis would later confirm no DNA match to Eli Marsh. It was not Eli's shoe. Whose it was, no one could say. The search teams went out on Friday afternoon. Volunteers from the village, police officers, a dog unit from York. They spread across the moors, calling Eli's name into the gray air. The fog had lifted, but the sky sat low and heavy, and the light was a flat, directionless kind that makes distances hard to judge. The hollow was a shallow depression in the moorland about 2 miles north of the village, a natural bowl in the landscape, filled with long grass and a few wind-bent rowans, bisected by a narrow stream that ran dark over limestone. The name had appeared on Ordnance Survey maps as far back as the 1890s, always in quotation marks, as if whoever had first written down wasn't sure it was a real place name or simply what people called it because they didn't know what else to say. The dog unit found something at the hollow at 4:17 p.m. Eli's backpack was sitting on a flat stone beside the stream. It was closed, neatly positioned, like luggage left outside a hotel. His mobile phone was inside, his PE kit, his copy of Lord of the Flies with his name written in the inside cover in the careful block capitals of a 12-year-old learning to assert himself through penmanship. There was no sign of Eli. There were no footprints leading away from the stone, though the ground around it was soft and should have held them. The forensics officer, a brisk woman named Dr. Femi Adeyemi, crouched over the site for a long time. She flagged the absence of prints. She measured the position of the bag. She photographed everything. In her notes, she wrote, "Bag position as if left deliberately. No disturbance of surrounding vegetation. No egress route detectable. Anomalous." She crossed out anomalous and wrote, "Unexplained." That night, D.I. crossed to the edge of the hollow in the last of the October light and felt something he had not felt in 30 years of police work. The specific, irrational, deeply unwelcome conviction that the landscape was watching him. He drove back to the village. He did not mention this in his report. Within a week, the story was national news. Missing Yorkshire teen. Police widened search. The photographs used were the school photo from last year. Eli in his navy jumper, slightly unsmiling, his dark eyes looking just past the camera as if it's something more interesting beyond the frame. His mother appeared on the local news, reading a statement with particular brave devastation of parents in these situations, the words precise and emptied of everything by grief. Ashford received the attention it had never wanted. Journalists in the pub, a television van parked beside the church, people who had never heard of the village typing its name into search bars. And in the village itself, the older residents began to talk, not to the journalists, not to the police, but in kitchens and over garden walls, and in particular low register of people sharing things they half believe and aren't sure they should. Margaret Horsley, 81, who had lived in Ashford her whole life, told her daughter that there had been another boy once, long before the war. She didn't know the details. It was the kind of thing that gets handed down without being explained. But there had been a boy from one of the farms, and he had gone up to the hollow, and when they found him, he was not the same. She didn't elaborate on what not the same meant. Her daughter, who was 56 and a retired nurse, wrote it off as a soft confusion of old age. Old Arthur Crane, who ran the post office with Mrs. Patel and was generally considered harmless if eccentric, told anyone who would listen that the hollow was a thin place, a place where whatever existed between here and somewhere else wore down to almost nothing. He'd read about it. There were places like that all over the north, places the Romans had known about, places the pre-Roman peoples had known about, places where strange things happened and where the sensible thing was to stay away. No one quite laughed at Arthur, because he was 83 and had known most of them since they were children, but no one quite took him seriously either. The only person who listened carefully was D.I. Cross, who happened to be standing in the post office buying a sandwich when Arthur said it. Cross filed it under local color in his mental notes. Then that evening, he found himself Googling thin places England moorland and spending 2 hours reading things that were not police procedure. He closed his laptop. He drank a whiskey. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. On the 9th day after Eli's disappearance, a girl named Rosie Tanner, 15, who had been in Eli's English class, came to police command post and asked to speak to someone. She told him about a conversation she'd had with Eli 4 days before he vanished. They'd been walking to the library together after school, just the two of them, loosely, the way you walk with someone you're not quite friends with but are comfortable around. And Eli had said something strange. He'd said, "Do you ever feel like you're not entirely here?" She thought he was talking about being bored or tired, like zoning out. "No," he said, "like, some part of you is somewhere else. And the part of you that's here, it's just covering for the rest." She hadn't known what to say to that, so she'd said something dismissive, and he'd let it drop, but she'd thought about it afterwards, and she was thinking about it more now. The detective constable who took her statement wrote it down carefully. He flagged it for Cross. Cross read it twice, then set it down on the table and looked at the wall of the village hall for a long time. He thought about Eli's essay, about the boys on the island, and the thing inside them that was always waiting. He thought about the backpack on the stone with no footprints leading away. He went back to the hollow that afternoon, alone, without telling anyone. It was a cold, clear afternoon, the first real clarity they'd had in weeks. The moors stretched out in every direction under a pale blue sky, the bracken gone russet and gold with the season, the stream at the bottom of the hollow glittering where the sun caught it. Cross stood at the stone where the backpack had been found. He was not an imaginative man. He had been a policeman for 30 years. He believed in evidence, in procedure, in the slow, patient accumulation of facts that eventually added up to truth. He did not believe in thin places. But standing there in the silence of the hollow, with the wind moving to the long grass in patterns that seemed almost intentional, he felt again the sensation of being watched. Not by anything he could see, by the place itself, by the particular quality of the air. He crouched beside the stream and looked at the water. It ran dark over the limestone, deep brown with peat, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought he could see something in it. Not a reflection, a shape, a figure, standing in a depth that shouldn't have been there, in water that was barely ankle deep. He blinked. The stream was just a stream. He stood up quickly and walked back to Moore, back toward the village. And he did not run, but he walked very fast. And he did not stop until the houses were visible and the sound of the village. A car, a dog, a child calling somewhere, came back to him, and the world was ordinary again. That night, he called his wife for the first time in 3 days. He didn't tell her why. 3 weeks after Eli Marsh disappeared, his sister Poppy found something in his bedroom. She had been allowed back in by then. The police had finished with it. Prints, fibers, the careful inventory of a life. And her mother had left it mostly untouched, the way bereaved families do, not out of reverence, but because moving things feels like admitting something. Poppy was 12, and she missed her brother with a directness that adults often lose, a grief that didn't perform itself but simply existed, heavy and constant, like a stone behind her eyes. She was sitting on his bed, holding his old Nintendo DS, the scratched gray one they'd shared as kids, when she noticed a sketchbook. It was under the edge of his mattress, not quite hidden, the corner visible. She pulled it out. Eli had always sketched. He was good at it, better than he ever let on, the way talented, quiet people often underplay themselves. The earlier pages were what you'd expect. Landscapes, birds, a few portraits of people from school, some science fiction-ish mechanical drawings. Then, about 2/3 of the way through, the drawings changed. The landscapes became the hollow. Again and again, from different angles, the same shallow depression, the same stream, the same bent Rowans. But in each drawing there was a figure, always in the distance, always too thin, always with its back turned. The same figure Eli had seen in the churchyard. The same figure that the 12-year-old girl across the road had seen. In the last drawing, the last page he'd filled, the figure was close, almost foreground, still facing away, but its head was turned just slightly, just enough to show the edge of a profile. And the profile was Eli's own face. Poppy sat very still on the bed for a long time. Then she went downstairs and showed her mother, who called D.I. Cross. Cross came back to Ashford the following morning. He sat at Karen Marsh's kitchen table and looked at the sketchbook for a long time without speaking. He turned the pages slowly, going backward from that last drawing, and he could see the progression, the innocent early sketches, then the hollow beginning to appear, first as background, then as subject, then as obsession, the figure arriving in drawing 14 and never leaving, growing closer with each page. He thought about Rosie Tanner's account. Some part of you is somewhere else, and the part of you that's here is just covering for the rest. He thought about the backpack with no footprints. He thought about the water. He drove back up to the hollow that morning with Dr. Adeyemi and a different dog unit and 2 officers. He didn't tell them why he wanted to go back. He said there was something he wanted to look at again. They found nothing new in the hollow itself. But one of the dogs, a German shepherd named Harris, behaved strangely at the stream. He approached it, then stopped, whining, his whole body low and reluctant in the way trained dogs are never supposed to be. He would not cross the water. His handler coaxed and commanded, and Harris simply flattened himself to the ground and refused. Adeyemi crouched at the edge of the stream. "There's something here," she said, after a moment. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. The ground is. Look at this." She pointed to the bank of the stream on the far side. The grass was bent away from the water's edge in a distinct arc, as if something large had sat or stood there. But the shape of the impression was wrong. Too wide. The wrong proportions, like a body that didn't quite fit together the way a body should. Cross looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at the water. It was just a stream. "I want this area researched," he said. "Upstream and down. Everything." They found him on a Tuesday, 26 days after he had vanished. A hill walker named Peter Gregson, coming over more from the east, saw a figure sitting on a rock about a mile north of the hollow, in a part of the moor that the search teams had covered twice. He called out. The figure did not respond. He approached. It was a boy, sitting with his knees drawn up, his arms around them, staring out across the moor. Dark hair, navy jumper, pale. He appeared physically unharmed. The boy turned when Peter Gregson spoke to him. He looked at him without surprise, without relief, without any of the expressions that a 14-year-old who had been missing for nearly a month should have had. "I'm all right," Eli Marsh said, in a voice that was his and not quite his, the right pitch, the right accent, something slightly off in cadence, like a song played at the wrong speed. "I just got turned around." Peter Gregson called 999 with shaking hands. The reunion at the hospital was what you would imagine and what you would not. Karen held him. Poppy held him. He let them, his arms rising slowly to their backs, his face pressed into his mother's shoulder. But his eyes, over Karen's shoulder, were open and calm and looking at nothing in particular. The doctors examined him. Physically, he was slightly underweight and somewhat dehydrated, but there were no injuries, no signs of trauma, no evidence of anything that might explain 26 days on the moor in October. His core temperature was normal. His blood work was unremarkable. There was no frostbite, no exposure damage, nothing. He was asked where he had been. "I don't really remember," he said. "I went to the hollow. I sat by the stream. And then I was sitting on the rock, and that man found me. Do you remember the time between?" "Not really. Bits." He paused, and something moved behind his eyes, not memory, but something else, something too still. "I was somewhere. It was very quiet." D.I. Cross interviewed him twice, gently, over 2 days. Eli was cooperative, patient, calm, remarkably calm, the kind of calm that a trained professional recognizes as either shock, dissociation, or something that doesn't have a clinical name yet. He answered every question in full sentences. He made eye contact. He was, in every observable way, fine. But Cross had been doing this for 30 years, and he noticed things. He noticed that when Poppy hugged Eli in the family room and said she'd missed him, Eli said, "I know," rather than, "I missed you too." He noticed that when the nurse made a small joke and the family laughed, Eli laughed a half-second too late. Not rudely, not obviously, just slightly out of sync, like a translation. He noticed that Eli, when he thought he was unobserved, sat absolutely still. Not the stillness of rest or tiredness or thought, the stillness of something that had forgotten, temporarily, that it was supposed to move. Cross went back to the hollow one final time, the day before he closed his report. He stood at the stream. The afternoon was still and cold. No wind, no bird song. He had Arthur Crane's words in his head. A place where whatever exists between here and somewhere else wears down to almost nothing. He thought about what wearing through looked like, whether it was a door or a membrane or something else entirely, whether whatever passed through it came back whole. He thought about the figure in Eli's drawings, always facing away, until the last one, the profile that was Eli's own face. He thought, what if it wasn't a thing that had been watching Eli? What if it was Eli watching himself? From the other side of whatever the hollow was, as if something in him had crossed over first and waited, and then the rest of them had followed, and only one of them had come back. He did not write this in his report. His report concluded, no evidence of criminal activity. Subject recovered safely. Circumstances of disappearance unexplained. Case closed pending further review. 6 months later, Eli sat his year 10 exams. He did well. He was quiet, attentive, well-behaved. His teachers noted that he'd matured over the year. His mother said he seemed older, somehow more composed. Connor Walsh remained his best friend, though Connor sometimes felt, and never said, that talking to Eli now was like talking to someone through glass. You could see him perfectly clearly. You could hear every word. But there was something between you. Rosie Tanner, who had always liked Eli, started avoiding him after they had a conversation in February that she couldn't explain and never entirely forgot. They'd been in the library, and she'd been upset about something, a family thing, something ordinary and private, and Eli had sat with her and said the right things, and she'd been almost comforted. And then he looked at her and said, "You should be glad you're still entirely here." She'd asked what he meant. He'd smiled, and the smile was his exact smile, the one she knew, and he'd said, "Nothing. Ignore me." But she didn't ignore it. She thought about it for a long time. She thought about what entirely meant when you used it that way, as if it were possible to be here in parts, as if presence were something that could be divided or traded, or left behind as shallow place on the moor where the water ran dark over limestone, and the grass bent in the wrong direction, and a dog named Harris had flattened himself to ground and refused to cross, as if something could come back wearing a boy like a coat. She never went to Hollow. She never told anyone what Eli had said. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, she would see Eli across a room or a corridor, and he would be completely still in that particular way, and their eyes would meet, and he would smile at her, and she would feel in the pit of her chest the specific and terrible knowledge that the thing behind the smile knew exactly what she was thinking, and was not afraid, and was not Eli. In the village of Ashford, in North Yorkshire, the Fox still swings on its pub sign in the autumn wind. The churchyard wall has been repaired. The Hollow sits on the moors it always has, 2 miles north, with its dark stream and its bent rollins and its silence. Some places remember what passed through them. Some things do too.